The shovel struck something that wasn't dirt. I remember the sound clear as yesterday. Not the dull thud of rock nor the crack of dry earth, but something else, something that gave. Then moved, then screamed. I stumbled back, my spine gone cold despite the August heat that had been baking my neck raw since sunrise. The scream was small, muffled, like it came from deep within the earth itself. I wiped sweat from my eyes, certain the sun had finally cooked my brain proper after 3 days digging fence posts in this god-forsaken stretch of nowhere. Then the dirt moved. Just a tremor at first, then a deliberate shift. I stood frozen, shovel half raised like a weapon, half shield. My hands shook so bad the metal head rattled. Another scream came, weaker this time, and I dropped to my knees, clawing at the earth with bare hands. 2 feet down, I touched fingers, small ones. They clutched at mine with the desperate strength of the dying. That was how I found her, half buried in the hard pan of my worthless ranch. A girl, no more than 14, her face caked with dirt and tears cutting clean tracks down to her chin. Her nightdress was torn and filthy, her breathing shallow. But her eyes, Lord help me, her eyes were alive with such terror that I nearly recoiled. "Don't put me back," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "Please, mister, don't put me back in the ground. I'm an old man now, sitting in this sanitized room they call peaceful, waiting for the consumption to finally take what's left of me. The doctors say writing might ease my mind before the end, but some burdens weren't meant for easing. Some stories need telling, not for absolution. There ain't none coming for me, but for truth. Before I'm planted in the same earth where this all began, I need someone to know what happened that summer of 1879, on the edges of the Texas Panhandle, in that place they called Dust's Edge. My name is Billy Colton, and this is my confession. I had no business owning land. City-born and orphaned young in Philadelphia, I'd spent most of my 38 years drifting west, taking work where I could, stable hand, cattle driver, freight hauler. Never stayed nowhere long enough to put down roots. The war left me with a stiffened left leg from a Yankee bullet at Antietam and nightmares that never quite faded. I still wake some nights feeling the press of bodies at the bloody lane, hearing the screams of men who'd been whole moments before. I wasn't suited for much beyond solitude after that. My hands were rough as oak bark, my skin weathered deep as old leather from years under the merciless western sun. What hair remained had gone gray early. The face that stared back from still water wasn't one many would trust at first glance. Too many hard years, too many memories etched into the lines around my eyes. The ranch came to me through a stroke of luck that, looking back, might have been the cruelest twist of fate. Won it in a poker game in Fort Worth from a man too drunk to know he was betting his deed. I remember his eyes when he realized what he'd done. Bloodshot and desperate. For a moment, I considered giving it back, but something stopped me. Maybe the same selfishness that had kept me alive all these years. 300 acres of nothing but scrub, dust, and distance from everything. Land that God forgot, where even the rattlesnakes struggled to survive. But it was mine. I took it because I'd never owned anything before. Because I was tired of drifting. Because, God help me, I thought I might make something of it. Fool notions from a man who should have known better. For 2 years, I'd worked that land alone, built a small cabin with my own hands, dug a well that barely produced enough water to keep me and my 2 horses alive, tried raising cattle, lost half to sickness, the other half to rustlers while I was laid up with fever. I should have given up, moved on. But something in me was too stubborn, too afraid of admitting defeat, so I stayed, surviving more than living, talking to no one but my horses for months at a stretch. Until that August day when my shovel struck something that wasn't dirt. I carried her to my cabin, this slip of a girl who weighed no more than a newborn calf, laid her on my bed, and used the last of my clean water to wash the earth from her face. She drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering words I couldn't make out. Her skin burned with fever. There were bruises on her neck. Her wrists, dark purple against pale skin, dirt caked beneath her fingernails. Evidence of her desperate struggle to claw her way out before I found her. The cabin's rough-hewn walls seemed to close in as I worked. Just one room with a small hearth, a table I'd made from packing crates, a single chair, and the narrow bed where she now lay. My few possessions hung from pegs or sat stacked in corners, a life contained in almost nothing. The roof leaked in 3 places when it rained, which wasn't often. I'd patched it with flattened tin cans, but they'd rusted through in spots. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the chinks between logs I'd never properly sealed. Dust sifted in, fine as flour, coating everything with the land's constant reminder that it would reclaim whatever you built if you didn't fight for it daily. Someone had tried to kill her before they buried her. The thought came unbidden, turning my stomach. I'd seen men die in the war, killed some myself. But this was different. This was an abomination. No matter what this child might have done, nothing justified such cruelty. And from her own kin, that made it all the worse. I had no medicine beyond whiskey and wild herbs I'd learned about from an old Comanche woman who'd once let me camp on her land when I was down with fever. No doctoring skills beyond binding wounds and setting the occasional broken bone. The nearest town, if you could call it that, was Bitter Creek, nearly 20 miles east across hard country. I couldn't leave her, not like this. So I did what I could, cooled her brow with dampened cloths, trickled water between her cracked lips, and waited. Night fell. I sat beside the bed, rifle across my knees. Whoever had done this might come looking, might want to finish what they'd started. The thought of someone searching for this child, not to save but to harm, stirred something in me. I thought the war had killed, a fierce, protective rage. Dawn broke with her eyes opening, clearer now. She stared at me, confusion giving way to fear. "You're safe," I said, my voice rough from disuse. "No one's gonna hurt you here." She tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely audible. "My ranch? Found you in the ground." The words sounded absurd even as I spoke them. "Who did that to you, girl?" She turned her face away, tears welling. "My brothers," she whispered, "Thomas and Jeremiah." Something cold settled in my gut. "Your own kin tried to bury you alive?" She nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "Thought died 3 weeks past. Left the ranch to all 3 of us equal. They didn't want to share. I'd heard stories of greed turning men cruel, but this, what's your name?" "Eliza," she said. "Eliza Winslow." The Winslows? I'd heard the name. They owned the largest spread in the county, 10 miles north of my pathetic plot. Cattle barons who'd carved their empire from the frontier with blood and grit. Old man Winslow had a reputation for fairness, but his sons were another matter. Hard men, folks said. Dangerous. "Your brothers think you're dead, I reckon." She shook her head, wincing at the movement. "They'll know I'm not," Thomas said he'd come back to make sure. Her eyes went wide with fresh terror. "They'll come looking." I nodded slowly, understanding now why fate had put my shovel in that particular patch of earth. Let them come. 3 days passed. Eliza grew stronger, though the bruises on her neck darkened before they began to fade. I gave her my bed, made myself a pallet on the floor, fed her what little I had, jerky, beans, the last of my cornmeal. She ate sparingly, watching me with wary eyes. Men had taught her nothing but betrayal. I'd never been around young folks much. Didn't know how to talk to her, what to say. So mostly I kept quiet, going about my chores, letting her rest. Each morning I expected to wake and find her trying to leave. Each morning she was still there, watching me with those haunted eyes. On the third night, she woke screaming, clawing at the air as if fighting off invisible hands. I sat beside her, awkward and unsure, until her eyes focused on me. "You're safe," I told her. "Just dreams." She nodded, but her breathing stayed quick and shallow. "I keep feeling the dirt," she whispered. "In my mouth, my nose. I can't breathe." I recognized the fear, had seen it in men after battle, had felt it myself some nights. "It ain't real," I said. "Not anymore." "Will it ever stop?" I wanted to lie, to tell her the memories would fade, but I'd never been much good at lying. "Gets easier to bear," I said. Instead, "never quite leaves you." She seemed to appreciate the honesty. Settled back, her breathing slowing. "Were you in the war, Mr. Colton?" "Billy," I corrected. "And yes, long time ago now." "Which side?" "Gray. Though sometimes I wonder if it mattered. Dead men on both sides looked the same." She considered this. "Pa fought too," said much the same thing. I nodded, understanding a little better why she'd accept help from a stranger like me. Her father had been a soldier. Perhaps she saw something familiar in my ways. "He teach you about ranch work?" I asked. A small smile touched her lips. "Everything he knew. Said I had a better head for figures than my brothers, better eye for good stock, too." I believed it. There was a sharpness to her, a resilience that went beyond mere survival. She'd need it in the days to come. On the fourth day, she was well enough to sit outside while I tended the horses. The August heat shimmered across the plains, distorting the horizon. Nothing moved out there but dust devils dancing in the distance. The sky stretched endless blue, no cloud to offer hope of rain. Even the scrub grass had given up, brown and brittle beneath our feet. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. I considered the question, rubbing my bad leg where it always ached in the heat. "Don't rightly know," I admitted. "Seemed the only thing to do. You could have taken me to town, to the sheriff. Sheriff Haynes drinks more than he breathes and takes money from men like your brothers." I shrugged. "Besides, you needed healing first." She looked out across the barren landscape. "This is your land, such as it is. It's not much." I almost smiled at her bluntness. "No, it ain't. Our ranch has 3,000 acres. Grasslands to the north. 2 creeks that run year-round. Nearly 800 head of cattle." Now I understood why her brothers had been willing to kill for it. That kind of spread meant power, meant never having to bow to any man. "Pa always said land was a man's only true legacy," she continued. "That's why he split it equal. Said none of us should have power over the others." Her voice dropped. "Thomas didn't see it that way." "How'd they do it?" I asked, immediately regretting the question when her face went pale. "They got me drunk first, said we should toast Pa's memory." Her fingers touched the bruises at her neck. "When the whiskey didn't work fast enough, Thomas used his hands. I remember fighting, then nothing. Woke up in the ground, dirt in my mouth, couldn't breathe." She stopped, trembling. "You don't have to speak on it." "They talked while they were digging. Said they'd tell everyone I ran off with a cattle driver, that I was wild, unpredictable. No one would question it." Her eyes met mine, suddenly fierce despite her fragile state. "But our foreman, Miller, he'd know better. He practically raised me after Ma died." I nodded, filing away the information. If we survived what was coming, this Miller might be an ally. "How far did they take you before they—" I couldn't finish the question. "Don't know exactly. We rode for hours. Thomas was careful about that, took a winding path." She looked around. Never seen this place before. That was something, at least. Meant they might not come looking this direction right away. But they would come. Men who'd try to bury their sister alive wouldn't leave loose ends. "Your brother said he'd come back to check," I said. "When?" After a week. That's what Thomas said. Her voice hitched. Tomorrow. They'll come tomorrow. I nodded, my mind already working through preparations. Then we'd best be ready. That night, I cleaned my old Sharps rifle and the Navy Colt I'd carried since the war. Checked and rechecked my small store of ammunition. 20 rifle cartridges. 18 for the Colt. Not much, if it came to a prolonged fight. The brass gleamed in the lantern light as I arranged them in neat rows on the table. Each one a potential life, including my own. The cabin felt smaller with her in it. The silence heavier. The Dohedus called to each other across the emptiness, their voices high and mournful. Inside, the only sounds were the metallic clicks of my preparations and the soft rhythm of Eliza's breathing. She watched in silence from the bed, her eyes tracking every movement. The lantern cast her shadow large against the wall, a reminder of how small she truly was. Just a child, really, thrust into a world of adult cruelty. "You'll kill them," she said finally. Not a question. My hands stilled, cartridge halfway into the cylinder. I'd been wondering the same thing myself, how far I was willing to go. What lines I would cross for this stranger who'd become my responsibility through no choice of her own. "If it comes to that," I answered honestly, "they're still my brothers." I looked at her, this child who'd been betrayed in the worst way by her own blood, yet still felt the pull of family. It was a sentiment I couldn't understand, having never known kin of my own, never had someone bound to me by blood and history. The closest I'd come was the brotherhood of soldiers, and that had dissolved like morning mist when the war ended. "What would you have me do, Eliza? Let them finish what they started?" She looked away, fingers tracing patterns on the rough blanket. "No," but her voice trailed off. "There's no good ending to this," I said, more gently. "But I aim to see you survive it." "Why?" she asked again. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" I slid the last cartridge into place, closed the cylinder with a snap. She waited for more, but I had no answer to give her. Not one I could put into words. How could I explain that in saving her, I'd found something I'd been missing since the war ended? A reason to be more than just a shadow moving through the world. A chance to atone for sins I couldn't name. "Get some sleep," I said instead. "Tomorrow comes early." But sleep eluded me that night. I sat by the window, watching the moonlit plains, thinking on her question. Why indeed was I willing to face killers for this girl? Perhaps because in saving her, I glimpsed some chance at redemption for my own sins. Or perhaps simply because, after years of existing rather than living, I'd found something worth fighting for. The moon traced its path across the sky, stars wheeling in its wake. I'd never had much use for God, not after what I'd seen in the war. But that night, I found myself whispering words that might have been a prayer, asking not for my safety, but for hers. Dawn broke gray and threatening, clouds heavy with the promise of one of those rare, violent storms that occasionally broke the drought. Fitting weather for what was to come. I woke Eliza early, helped her into one of my shirts that hung like a tent on her frame. "I need you to listen careful," I told her. "If trouble comes, you hide under the floorboards." I'd shown her the small cellar I'd dug my first year, where I stored what little I had against winter. "You stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Understand?" She nodded, solemn-eyed. "If things go wrong, wait till nightfall. Take my bay mare. She's gentler than the gelding. Ride east to Bitter Creek, find the livery stable. Man there, named Washington. He owes me a favor. He'll help you get somewhere safe." "You're talking like you expect to die," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer that. Just handed her a biscuit, the last of our food. "Eat, keep your strength up." We waited through the morning. The air grew thick and still, the way it does before a storm. No birds called, even the insects fell silent, the world holding its breath. Midday passed. then afternoon. With each hour, I began to hope maybe they wouldn't come. Maybe they'd assume animals had gotten to her remains. Eliza tensed suddenly. "Riders," she said. I hadn't heard anything, but moments later, I caught it too. The distant drumming of hooves. 3 horses, maybe 4, coming fast from the north. "Go," I told her. "Into the cellar. Now." She hesitated, then surprised me by stepping forward and wrapping thin arms around my waist in a brief, fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she was gone, disappearing through the trap door. I stepped onto my porch, rifle in hand, and watched them materialize from the heat haze. 4 riders, dust billowing behind them. They slowed as they approached, spreading out in a line about 50 yards from my cabin. I recognized the tactic from the war, making themselves harder to hit all at once. The leader nudged his horse forward a few steps. Tall man, broad-shouldered, with a beard that did little to hide the hard set of his jaw. He wore a fine black hat and a vest, despite the heat. Beside him, a younger man with the same strong features but clean-shaven. The family resemblance was unmistakable. Thomas and Jeremiah Winslow. The other 2 were ranch hands, hard-faced men with the look of killers about them. "Afternoon," Thomas called. "Hope we're not intruding." I didn't answer, just stood with my rifle held casual but ready. "Looking for my sister," he continued. "Young girl might have passed this way. Ran off a few days back. Family's worried sick." "Ain't seen no girl," I replied, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Just me out here." Thomas's eyes narrowed, scanning my cabin. The pitiful excuse for a barn. The half-dug fence posts. "Mind if we take a look around? She's not right in the head. Might have hidden somewhere." "I mind plenty," I said. "This is my land. You've got no cause to be on it." The younger brother, Jeremiah, leaned forward in his saddle. "You calling my brother a liar, old man? I'm saying there's no girl here, and you'd best move on." Thomas studied me, a cold calculation in his eyes. "You sure about that? Because we tracked her this direction. Found disturbed earth not 5 miles from here." His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol. "Funny thing to find in the middle of nowhere." My blood ran cold. They'd gone back to her grave, found it empty. Now they were searching, methodical as wolves, on a blood trail. "Plenty of animals dig in the dirt," I said. "Could have been coyotes." "Could have been," Thomas agreed, not believing it for a second. "Still, we'll need to have a look." The air between us pulled taut as a fiddle string. One wrong move, one wrong word, and blood would water this dusty ground. Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if God himself were growling a warning. "I'll tell you one last time," I said quietly. "There's no girl here. Now get off my land." Thomas sighed, as if disappointed by my stubbornness. He turned to the ranch hands. Phillips, Dawson, searched the place. The men started to dismount. I raised my rifle to my shoulder. "That'd be unwise," I said. Everything stopped. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on me, measuring my resolve. I'd faced down Confederate charges with less fear than I felt in that moment, but I didn't let it show. "You willing to die over this?" Thomas asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Are you?" I countered. A smile spread across his face, but it never reached his eyes. "Mister, I don't know what you think you're protecting, but I guarantee it ain't worth your life." "Some things are." His smile faded. "You've seen her then?" I said nothing, which was answer enough. Thomas exchanged a look with his brother. Some silent communication passed between them. "Where is she?" Jeremiah demanded, his voice cracking with what might have been panic. "What'd you do with her?" "I didn't do anything to her," I said, my voice hard as iron. Thomas's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about, old man. I know about the bruises on her neck." Know about the inheritance your PA left. Know you tried to bury your sister alive for her share. The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. This wasn't what they'd been told, clearly. She's filling your head with lies, Thomas said smoothly. Eliza's troubled. Has been since our mother passed, prone to fantasy and self-harm. We've been trying to get her help. It was a practiced speech, delivered with just the right note of brotherly concern. I wondered how many times he'd rehearsed it, how many people he expected to fool. Funny way of helping, burying someone with dirt in their lungs. Thunder cracked closer now, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. The sky had turned the color of a week-old bruise. Phillips, Dawson, Thomas said quietly. Find the girl. Bring her out. The men hesitated, looking between their boss and my rifle. Now, Thomas barked. They dismounted, hands hovering near their sidearms. I fired a shot into the ground at their feet. The horses reared, whinnying in panic. The men scrambled back. Next one won't miss, I warned. Thomas drew his pistol with practiced speed. Neither will mine. We faced each other across 20 yards of dust, rain beginning to pelt down harder now, turning the ground to mud. You think you can take all four of us? He called over the rising wind. Maybe not, I admitted. But I'll surely take you with me, Thomas Winslow, and I expect your sister gets everything then. Uncertainty flickered across his face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. Rain plastered his shirt to his shoulders, dripped from the brim of his hat. You're outnumbered and outgunned, he said. Be reasonable. Hand her over, and we'll forget this unfortunate business. Like you forgot her in that grave? His jaw tightened. That was regrettable, but necessary. Nothing necessary about fratricide. I spat. You have no idea what's at stake, he said, almost pleading now. That land, that ranch, it's everything. Our father was a fool to think a girl could manage her share. She'd have married the first smooth-talking drifter and lost it all. So you decided to take the choice from her, permanent-like. The rain was coming in sheets now, the sky split by lightning. Through the downpour I saw Thomas make some signal to his men. They began to spread out, trying to flank me. I knew I couldn't watch them all. Knew with cold certainty that I was about to die on this worthless patch of earth. But if I could take Thomas with me, maybe Eliza would have a chance. Last warning, I called. Leave now, all of you. The girl stays with me. Thomas raised his pistol. I think not. A shot cracked through the storm, but it wasn't from Thomas's gun nor mine. One of the ranch hands crumpled from his saddle with a strangled cry. The horses panicked, rearing and bucking as more shots rang out from behind me. I risked a glance back and saw Miller, it had to be him, the foreman Eliza had mentioned, with 3 of his men, rifles at their shoulders. They'd circled around from the east, using the storm as cover. Drop your weapons, Miller bellowed. Now. Thomas's face contorted with fury. For a moment, I thought he might shoot anyway, might choose death over surrender. But Jeremiah grabbed his arm, shouting something I couldn't hear over the storm. Slowly, Thomas lowered his pistol. On the ground, Miller ordered. All of you. The brothers dismounted, sinking to their knees in the mud. The remaining ranch hand followed suit, hands raised. Miller approached cautiously, rifle trained on Thomas. Before I could answer, the cabin door flew open. Eliza stood there, soaked instantly by the driving rain, her face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Miller!" she cried. The foreman's weathered face broke into a smile of pure joy. "Thank God," he breathed. Thomas lunged. Then, a last desperate move. He pulled a small derringer from his boot, aiming not at me or Miller, but at his sister, and fired without thinking. The shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The derringer discharged harmlessly into the mud. Jeremiah screamed his brother's name, crawling toward him through the muck. "Don't move," Miller shouted, but the younger Winslow ignored him, reaching his brother's side. Thomas lay on his back, rain washing the blood from his wound into the thirsty earth. His eyes found mine, filled with a hatred so pure it transcended pain. "You're a dead man," he wheezed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Miller's men secured the brothers and the remaining ranch hand, binding their hands with rope. The one I'd shot earlier wasn't moving. Eliza approached slowly, stopping a few feet from her brothers. They stared up at her like she was a ghost, which, to them, she was. "How?" Thomas demanded. "How did you survive?" She didn't answer him, just turned to Miller. "You came for me." The foreman nodded, emotion making his voice rough. "Found your journal, where you wrote about Thomas's threats. When you disappeared." He shook his head. "I knew, started searching, but the storm washed away most tracks. Then we heard a shot." "Lucky timing," I said. "Wasn't luck," Miller replied. "Been watching the Winslow boys for days, waiting for them to lead us to her one way or another." Eliza looked down at her brothers, rain streaming down her face, indistinguishable from tears. "What happens now?" she asked, so quietly I almost didn't hear her over the storm. Miller glanced at Thomas's wound, which was bleeding freely. "We take them to town." "To the sheriff. Sheriff Haynes is in their pocket," I said. "Not anymore," Miller replied grimly. "Telegram came yesterday from the federal marshal. Seems Haynes has been looking the other way on more than just Winslow business. His replacement arrives next week." Thomas laughed, a wet, pained sound. "Won't matter. No one will believe her over us. We're Winslows." "They'll believe this," Eliza said, pulling something from her pocket, a folded paper somehow kept dry. She unfolded it carefully. "P.'s letter. The one you thought you burned, Thomas. I kept a copy hidden." The color drained from Thomas's face. "It says everything," she continued. "How you threatened him when he decided to split the ranch. How he feared for my safety after he was gone." Her voice hardened. "He knew what you were capable of." The fight seemed to leave Thomas then. He sagged in the mud, defeated not by my bullet but by his father's foresight. Miller and his men loaded the prisoners onto horses. One of them draped the dead ranch hand over his saddle. "You coming, Eliza?" Miller asked gently. She looked at me, then back at him. "I need a moment." Miller nodded, understanding. "We'll wait for you down the trail." They rode off, taking the Winslow brothers with them. The storm was beginning to ease, the rain falling straight down now instead of being driven by wind. Eliza stood beside me on the porch, both of us dripping wet, watching them go. "It's over," I said, not quite believing it myself. "No," she replied, with a wisdom beyond her years. "It's just beginning. The trial, the gossip, rebuilding the ranch." She sighed. "Everything's changed." "You've got your life back," I reminded her. "Your inheritance?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. And I owe that to you." I shook my head. "You'd have found a way. You're stronger than you know." She studied me. This child who'd aged years in a week. "What will you do now?" I looked out at my land, still worthless, still mine. The fence posts half dug, the cabin leaking in a dozen places. The life I'd built, such as it was. Same as before, I reckon. Keep trying to make something of this place. Alone? The question hung between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't ready to face. I'd been alone most of my life. Preferred it that way. Or so I'd told myself. "It's what I know," I said finally. She nodded, accepting this. "The Winslow Ranch will need a new foreman," she said carefully. "Miller's getting on in years. Says he wants to retire." I raised an eyebrow. "That so?" "It is." She hesitated. "I could use someone I trust. Someone who knows ranching and isn't afraid of hard work. Someone, she trailed off, suddenly shy. Someone who'd pull you out of the ground. I finished for her. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Something like that. I looked at my cabin, at the muddy expanse of my land. I'd come here seeking solitude, seeking a place to exist without the weight of other people's expectations. Instead, I'd found purpose in the most unexpected way. I'll think on it, I promised. She nodded, satisfied for now. I should go. Miller's waiting. You'll be all right? Eventually. She stepped forward, taking my weathered hand in her small one. Thank you, Mr. Colton, for my life. I nodded, unable to find words adequate for the moment. She squeezed my hand once, then let go and walked toward where Miller waited, her back straight despite everything she'd endured. I watched until they disappeared into the lifting mist, this child who'd been buried alive and emerged stronger for it. Then I went inside my empty cabin and sat by the cold hearth, listening to the last of the rain on my roof, wondering what it might be like to have a purpose beyond mere survival. In the end, I did take that foreman position. Couldn't rightly do otherwise. Sold my worthless plot for barely enough to buy a decent saddle, but I kept a small corner of it, that patch where my shovel had struck something that wasn't dirt. Fenced it off, planted a single cottonwood tree that struggled but survived, just like its namesake. Never told Eliza about it. Some things a man keeps to himself. The Winslow Ranch prospered under her hand. Where her father and brothers had seen only cattle, Eliza saw possibilities. Added sheep when wool prices rose. Planted alfalfa in the bottomlands where water gathered after rain. Built a proper ranch house to replace the drafty one her father had thrown up in haste 30 years before. Her decisions weren't always popular with neighboring ranchers, especially the sheep, but she stood her ground with a quiet strength that earned respect, if grudgingly given. The Winslow brothers went to prison. Thomas for 20 years, Jeremiah for 15 as an accomplice. Neither lived to serve their full term. Prison life didn't agree with men accustomed to power and open skies. Thomas died in a yard fight his 3rd year in. Jeremiah took fever 2 winters later. Eliza received both telegrams with the same expression, a mixture of sorrow and resignation, but no surprise. She'd mourned them, in her way, the day they'd put her in the ground. She grew into a formidable woman. Married eventually, but not until she was good and ready, and to a man who respected her strength rather than feared it. A cattle buyer from Kansas City with kind eyes and gentle hands, who looked at her like she hung the moon. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all of whom grew up knowing the value of hard work and family loyalty. Not once did she raise a hand to them in anger. Not once did they see fear in her eyes when she looked at them. I stayed on as foreman until my hands grew too gnarled to work cattle, my leg too stiff to mount a horse without help. Even then, she wouldn't hear of me leaving. Gave me a small house on the ranch, insisted I'd earned my keep. Your family, she'd say whenever I protested. And I suppose, in our own way, we were bound not by blood, but by earth, by a grave that became a beginning rather than an end. Her children called me Uncle Billy, came to me with their troubles and triumphs. I taught them to ride, to shoot straight, to look a person in the eye when speaking. In return, they gave me something I'd never expected to have, a sense of belonging, of continuity, a place in the world beyond just taking up space. The years wore on. The country changed around us. Railroad came through, bringing people, progress. Towns grew where once had been only wilderness. The old ways faded, replaced by new inventions, new ideas. I watched it all with the detachment of a man who'd already seen one world die and another take its place. Now, as I write these last words, consumption eating away at what's left of my lungs, I think of that August day when my shovel struck something that wasn't dirt. One moment that changed everything. One chance to do right in a life largely lived wrong. I don't know if there's redemption waiting for a man like me, don't know if my ledger balances in the final accounting. But I do know this: sometimes salvation comes not in grand gestures or divine intervention, but in the simple human choice to dig someone out rather than bury them deeper. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough. The nurse is coming now, with medicine that dulls the pain, but clouds my mind. Soon I'll be too far gone to finish this story, but perhaps it's already complete. Perhaps all stories are, in their way, if only we knew where to end them. So I'll end mine here with this truth. I came into this world alone and expected to leave it the same way. Instead, I find myself surrounded by a family I never sought, but somehow found. Eliza sits beside my bed most days, her hair gone gray now, reading me passages from books I never had time for in life. Her grandchildren bring wildflowers they've picked from the very land where once I found her. And when the time comes, as it surely will before the week is out, they'll bury me not in a pauper's unmarked grave, but in the small family plot on the rise behind the ranch house, where I can rest with a view of the open country I came to love. Not such a bad end, all things considered. Not bad at all, for a man who once had nothing but a worthless piece of land and a rusted shovel that struck something that wasn't dirt. Something that moved. Something that screamed. Something that, in saving, somehow saved me too.